All right, so this is the statistical and research section of your notes, so make sure you title it statistics. And this is covering reading pages 37 to 46. This is the fourth and last video of Unit 1. So we've been reviewing how research is organized. Research is organized by using the scientific method. The first thing you do is you ask a question, you then develop the hypothesis, you then use a method to gather data. And then once you gather the data, this is the section of the video we're going to talk about now, is you crunch the numbers and analyze the data set. It's often known as statistics. And you're going to look at the data either a quantitative or qualitative way. And then the last thing you're going to do is either you're going to share your data if it proves the hypothesis, or you're going to modify it. So the goals for this video are to talk about quantitative and qualitative data, is to talk about the difference between mean, median, mode, talk a little bit about standard deviation, and then talk about the normal curve. So, statistics. Again, once research is collected, they need to know how to explain it. So they use statistics. There's two different types of analysis. They could either talk about the quantitative. This is data that's described in numerical graphs, forms, or presented in charts. Or you could do qualitative. And this is data that's usually presented in verbal terms, describes the people, or just is more descriptive of the data that they found. The qualitative or the quantitative is going to explain the numbers portion. So what is stats? Stats takes data and computes it into smaller terms. For example, putting it into percentages. So they use this using descriptive statistics and the central tendency, and you may have learned this in your class. It's a single score that represents a whole set of numbers. So you can find the mean, the median, or the mode. You have all this data and you're trying to crunch it down into smaller numbers. So the first one is the median. The median they often use is a measure of central tendency represented by the score that separates the upper half of scores in a distribution from the lower half of the scores. So it's minimally affected by the extreme scores. It's used with outliers often. So to calculate this for the following set of numbers is if you had 68, 70, 75, 65, and 72. What I often do is I'm trying to find the median, which is the one in the middle. I put them in order, okay? So I would put 65, 68, 70, 72, 75. The number for this then would be 70. Okay, so you're looking at the number in the middle. Again, this is not affected by outliers if someone scores really low or really high, because it's taking the score in the middle. The big advantage out of the median is not affected by the extreme scores. Mode, a measure of central tendency which represents the scores that occur most often, MO, most often. It's often used for yes or no questions. And if we had an example of calculating it for the following set of numbers, if we had 60, 70, 70, 75, 65, 72, okay, the one that's used most often would be 70. Okay, and then the last one is a mean, which is the average. This one you use often. It's the measure of central tendency most often used to describe a set of data. It takes into effect all data, so it takes into effect the outliers. Researchers actually prefer the mean. Outliers skew the mean. Okay, most students received a 70, then the outlier would really skew that data. To calculate the mean, simply add up all the numbers and then divide it by the number of scores. So calculate the mean for the following set of numbers, and you could pause it and practice this if you want. 68, 70, 75, 65, and 72. So I'd add all three up and then divide by 5. The answer should be 70. The range is known as the difference between the highest score and the lowest score. So usually the highest score in this example would be, again, 75, and the lowest score would be 65. So the range, which is kind of known as like the spread of numbers, is 10. So another concept to talk about is standard deviation. Standard deviation is a computed score to measure how much scores vary among the average. So a standard deviation is a calculation where they look at the mean and the individual scores. The standard deviation is going to tell you how far you're actually off from the mean. Okay. You do not need to know how it's calculated, but you should know what the standard deviation is. So, for example, the average on a test was 70%. Okay, so if we add this as our, obviously the average, most of the scores fell within the normal bell curve. Okay. Standard deviation is often a number that represents a larger portion of your data. We calculated the standard deviation for our example and received 1 standard deviation point. So the standard deviation would be a group of numbers that were from 70 to 80, and it would be from 80 to 90, and then it would be from 90 to 100. So there's 3 standard deviations from the mean. The larger the standard deviation, okay, the more spread out the numbers are. Okay, so if it has a larger standard deviation, the numbers are going to be more spread out. The smaller the standard deviation, the less the numbers are spread out. For example, which of the following sets of data has the greatest standard deviation? If you had 10 all the way to 50, if you had 5 all the way to 18, if you had 90 to 95, which ones has the greatest standard deviation? It would be, if you had to look at it, A. Okay, this one has the largest standard deviation because it's more spread out. Okay, the smaller is C. You should also understand the characteristics of a normal curve. When giving a test, most teachers want to find the scores within a bell-shaped curve. A normal distribution is a distribution that produces a bell-shaped curve. The characteristics are 50% of the scores are above the mean and 50% are below the mean. 68% of the scores are within 1 standard deviation of the mean. There can sometimes be skewed data. Skewed data is when the distributions are at one end or another end of the scatter plot. Positively skewed distributions, okay, or most scores are below the mean. Okay, when the outliers are on the outliers are the right tail over here. Negative, okay, is when their scores are above the mean, and then you have a few outliers, okay, on the left side of the screen, and then you have a normal distribution curve. Okay, and that's it on the statistics.